She was 6 years old the first time she understood that love could leave without saying goodbye, not the way childhood stories prepare children for loss, with funerals and flowers and tearful explanations sitting across a kitchen table, but the quiet, suffocating kind where a father is simply there one morning and then, without ceremony or warning, is not. No argument she could hold in her memory, no goodbye she could return to when things got hard, only a door that stopped opening, a phone that stopped ringing, and a silence so complete it became the background noise of everything that followed. That little girl grew up in that silence. She survived it, and on the day she turned 18, she did something that sent a ripple through Hollywood and celebrity culture worldwide, not with a press conference, not with a bitter memoir sold to the highest bidder, but by signing 3 words onto a legal document: Suri Holmes. A name chosen not from anger, but from the quiet, unshakable dignity of someone who had spent 12 years waiting and had finally, completely stopped. This is the story of Suri Holmes, the girl the world once watched being carried on Tom Cruise's shoulders through the streets of New York City, the girl who disappeared into a carefully guarded private life after her parents' divorce in 2012, and the young woman who has now chosen, deliberately and without apology, to step fully out of her father's shadow. The celebrity gossip version of this story gets told all the time. What almost never gets told is the human one underneath it, the one about a child who measured love not in the money that arrived on schedule, but in the presence that never did. Suri's birth on April 18, 2006, at St. John's Health Center in Santa Monica set the tone for everything that followed. From the very first moment of her life, the extraordinary and the deeply unsettling existed side by side. Her mother, Katie Holmes, followed Scientology's silent birth doctrine, which required her to suppress every sound of pain during labor, while men enforced church rituals in a delivery room that should have belonged only to a mother and her child. Tom Cruise framed this as an act of devotion. Katie endured it as something she would later describe only in careful, measured language that said more in what it left out than in what it stated. Those first years looked extraordinary from the outside, the kind of existence that magazine covers in the entertainment industry are constructed around. Private estates, global red carpets, security details, a family whose every public outing became international news. None of that framing survived contact with what was actually happening inside those walls. Katie's parents grew increasingly alarmed, watching their daughter move through daily life, never quite alone, always flanked by associates from the Church of Scientology who functioned less like companions and more like monitors. People who spent time around her described a woman who felt observed even inside her own home, who changed phones with unnerving frequency, who chose her words with the precision of someone who believed every conversation carried consequences. Suri understood none of that. She was a small child living inside the only world she knew, and that world included a father whose presence was enormous, physical, and alive. He was the footsteps in the hallway at the end of the day, the warmth that made the world feel manageable and safe. And then, without explanation, he was gone. Not in the gradual way some parents fade from a child's daily life, but in the total, rupturing way of a divorce filed in June 2012, just days before Tom Cruise turned 50, while he was in Iceland filming Oblivion, far enough away that the headlines carried the news to him the same way they carried it to everyone else. What the public watched as a bold celebrity split was, for Katie Holmes, the conclusion of months of planning carried out with extraordinary precision and extraordinary fear. New York was chosen deliberately because its family law courts favored a parent prioritizing a child's stability. The filing happened while Tom was overseas because she needed time, and every additional hour of delay created additional risk. 11 days after filing, the divorce was finalized. Tom agreed to approximately $400,000 annually in child support, along with medical and educational costs. Full custody went to Katie. The money wasn't what she'd been fighting for. Freedom was the only thing on the list that mattered. The deeper fear centered on Suri's future inside Scientology's institutional structures. Former members of the religion had spoken at length about the Sea Org program and its demands, and Katie believed completely that no child should be drawn into that environment. Tom Cruise's commitment to Scientology wasn't ceremonial or occasional. It was total and structural, the organizing framework through which he understood his life and his responsibilities. Katie grasped what that meant for a daughter growing up inside that world without anyone to pull her back out. Career momentum, friendships, security, every remaining inch of her privacy. She was willing to let all of it go to ensure Suri had a different future. The morning after the settlement was final, Katie packed 2 suitcases, took her daughter's hand, and disappeared into New York City. For Suri, the move felt like waking up inside a different story. The estates and security details fell away, replaced by a small, human-scale life built from school mornings and subway rides and homework at the kitchen table. Katie walked her to class and made stability out of whatever remained after everything else had been stripped away. She gave Suri everything reachable with her own 2 hands. The one thing beyond her reach was a father who chose to show up. What followed settled into a particular kind of grief that doesn't announce itself loudly, but accumulates over years. Walking past a movie theater meant seeing her father's face on a poster 20 feet high. A bookstore visit meant finding him on a magazine cover, larger than life and completely unreachable. Film after film, stunt after stunt, the man she hadn't heard from in years was everywhere the eye could land in popular culture and celebrity entertainment. None of that made him present in her actual life. The gap between his omnipresence in global film and his complete absence from her daily existence became the defining texture of her adolescence, growing heavier with every birthday that passed without a message, every school performance with an empty seat. Reports that circulated in 2013 suggested Tom had seen Suri only once in the months directly following the divorce, and after that, confirmed contact disappeared from any available record. No photographs, no confirmed visits. The child support and educational expenses continued arriving as the 2012 settlement required. Every financial obligation met on schedule. None of that money filled a seat at her performances or answered a question a teenager needed someone to answer. Children measure love in presence, not in payments. The questions Suri carried through her preteen years kept changing shape as she grew. Early on, absence could still be explained with the logic available to a child who wanted to believe the best: schedules. The enormous machinery of making blockbuster films. By her early teens, the comfortable explanation had stopped fitting the evidence, and she'd moved from asking where her father was to the far more painful question of why he hadn't come. She watched friends being picked up from school by fathers who asked about their days with genuine interest. Standing on sidewalks learning to hold her expression very still became a skill she didn't ask for. She rode the subway home and folded her disappointment small enough to carry internally, not because she didn't feel it, but because her mother had already been carrying so much for so long without asking for anything in return. The pandemic arrived in 2020 and brought the kind of forced stillness that gives people time they haven't sought and thoughts they can't redirect. Suri was 14, old enough to search for answers independently. She read testimonies from former Scientology members, sat with documentary footage, and absorbed the careful accounts of people who had once been inside the religion and had spent years afterward trying to describe what that life had actually required of them. Her name appeared nowhere in those accounts. The architecture of her own experience appeared everywhere. The way the organization's structures could create distance between members and people who existed outside it. The way relationships with non-members were sometimes treated as complications rather than simply as human bonds. None of it appeared written in a language directed at her. All of it landed with the weight of something she had been living for years without having words for it. That understanding built in layers over months. Katie Holmes had decided years earlier not to deliver truth to her daughter before she had the capacity to hold it, which meant she answered questions honestly while keeping bitterness out of the vehicle. Gradually, on her own timeline, Suri arrived at a version of the truth she could live inside. By 16, she had stopped expecting birthday calls, not with visible rage, but with the quiet finality of someone who has waited long enough to understand that waiting itself is something she no longer had to do. What she grew into was quieter and more complete than anger, an exhausted acceptance that the father who existed for her lived only in photographs and in the specific memories of years that ended before she turned 7. Turning 18 in April 2024 meant the legal architecture of her life finally aligned with the internal architecture she had been building quietly for years. In college application essays, she wrote for the first time what she had been carrying: One passage read, "Sometimes we don't grow up with love. We grow up with the space that love leaves behind." Tom Cruise's name appeared nowhere in those sentences. The entire world already knew exactly who she was describing. On May 17, 2024, she signed the paperwork to legally change her name from Suri Cruz to Suri Noel Holmes. Holmes was her mother's surname. Noel was her mother's middle name. Every syllable chosen as a deliberate tribute to the one person who had carried her through the hardest years without flinching. She expected to cry when she signed, and she didn't. What came instead was relief. The specific, deep-bodied relief of someone who has set down something carried so long the weight had stopped feeling like a choice. The name appeared first in her high school graduation program, then on the cast list for her role in a production of the Addams Family musical, and then on enrollment documents for Carnegie Mellon University, where she began studying fashion design in the fall of 2024. Entertainment media called it a statement. Suri didn't respond to any of it. She had already said everything that required saying through 3 words on a legal document signed on an ordinary afternoon. Katie Holmes visited often during those early months at the university, carrying boxes into her daughter's dorm room with tired but grateful hands. Publicly, she said only one thing about her daughter during this entire period. She called her an incredible person. 4 words. They contained within them, compressed almost beyond recognition, everything she had given up to make that outcome possible. Tom Cruise, during the same period, was preparing for a film set to shoot partially in outer space with NASA support, performing stunts that continued testing the outer limits of what a human body can survive. His financial obligations to Suri continued being met consistently. What he had not done, according to every available record, was walk through a door to simply be with her. Not once in more than a decade that anyone could confirm. Suri Holmes is 19 years old now, a fashion student at Carnegie Mellon University, living a life built entirely on her own terms. She woke up on her most recent birthday without reaching for a phone to check for a message that wasn't coming. She walked across campus wearing the identity she had built quietly over years that should have been easier, carrying forward the understanding that some people survive their childhoods not because they received everything they needed, but because they discovered inside themselves, slowly and without instruction, the capacity to endure what they were denied and build something real from what remained. The story of Suri Holmes holds something that stays with you long after the facts have faded. Not the celebrity details or the Scientology dimensions or the Hollywood divorce that surrounded all of it, but the human truth underneath every layer of that noise. Children measure love in presence. Absence is never neutral. A father who is alive and chooses not to come leaves a particular kind of mark that no child support payment, however faithfully delivered, can ever reach. And some people find, after years of waiting in a doorway for footsteps that are never going to come, that the most powerful thing they can do is simply stop waiting, step back from that doorway, and walk in an entirely different direction toward a life that no longer needs permission to begin. Suri found that capacity. She built it over more years than any child should have had to. At 19, she carries it forward into everything that comes next, with the name she chose, in the city she chose, studying the craft she chose, living the life she built. The girl who once waited for footsteps she would never hear again has stopped listening for them entirely, and what she's walking toward now belongs completely and only to her.